50 years ago, we didn't have computers, right?
That's right.
There were hand-drawn markups that'll be handed over to whoever. I mean, I wasn't alive 50 years ago, but I'm assuming that's what happened. Yeah.
Yep.
The computers came along. Yep. And we came up with CAD designs, PDFs. Great. That happened, 20, 25 years ago?
Yeah.
Cool. 25 years later, we're still doing the same thing, Simon. It's still PDFs. It's still multiple PDFs.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So from an innovation standpoint, in 20 years, we haven't, the RMA process slowed things down. The consenting process is too long. Can I just throw a suggestion out there, right? Why can't we use 3D models to start approving building consents?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
It makes absolute sense in my head.
Yeah. And
like, why don't we do that today? Why can't we focus on policy or get councils to adapt and adopt technology rather than still sticking with age-old PDFs that we're so used to? You in construction, how many PDFs have you reviewed?
Well, many, and marked up drawings and given them back for redrawing. Hand-marked them, and then given them back to the drafting team to modify them.
Yep.
Now,
funny though, we're still doing the same thing.
But you raised this issue of why don't we give councils the ability to look at 3D models? Well, I would actually take it one step further and say, why do councils need to be involved in that at all? Because if you think about what is the role of local government, I mean, local government couldn't possibly do a better job of understanding your design and giving you feedback to improve your design than the ultimate asset owner of that design. You're building that asset for somebody who's going to own and operate it, potentially for decades or hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So we need to reimagine what the role of local government is in the building and construction process.
What would they do?
Well, I think it's very helpful to have a repository of information about the built environment, about natural hazards, about community-owned assets. But rather than having local government involved in essentially assessing every building consent for conformance, what the Act party would say is that we should be actually getting councils as far away from the process as possible, because every time they look at a plan or a drawing, then they're taking on liability. And that's why councils have been involved in the weather-tight homes fiasco. That's why that's why they have joint and several liability applied to them, because they were the ones who looked at the drawings and approved them. Now, they haven't added any value. In fact, they've given a whole lot of Kiwi homeowners a false sense of security by being involved. And they've exposed ratepayers to this phenomenal liability of billions and billions of dollars and with no end in sight. So if you think about...
So in that instance, let's pick that weather tightness issue as an example. Right. So if the councils didn't take liability, where would that liability have sat according to the new policy that you're proposing? Or what do you want?
Well, if we look at other jurisdictions like Australia, the liability sits
with the constructor.
With the constructor, with the designer, and they also have private construction and private building insurers there. Now, there is a market for that in Australia, and I think what would be helpful would be to look at some of those things that in New Zealand we might call innovations, but which are normal in other jurisdictions, and try to incorporate them in the way we work in New Zealand.
So fair enough. So back to the weather tight issue, right?
Yeah.
So if the councils didn't take that liability and the construction companies took the liability, me as an owner of the building, I have a weather tight problem right now. I'd go after the construction company, not after the council.
Yeah, that's right. Or potentially
right now,
the designer.
I mean, not all
homeowners are as sophisticated as you and I, Andy, as your engineering and planning professionals who know what questions to ask. Most Kiwis who own homes will be absolutely devastated to find that there's moisture or water entering the building envelope, and they won't know what to do. It must be the most awful thing to experience for people. And so I think we also need to be clear that there must be an easy pathway for people to seek resolution, but we also need to think about what is the role of these different agencies and organisations, what's the purpose of regulation and lawmaking, and can we make laws that actually make it very clear that responsibility lies with parties who are actually able to manage that risk. Whereas at the moment, councils are taking on a whole lot of risk that they're actually not able to manage. And when they do try and manage building risk, then it's like, oh, well, you can't go to the next stage of building or closing in or putting the windows in until the council inspector's been. And I hear from friends involved in residential buildings, sometimes it's up to 14 inspections. Now, every time that inspector walks on site, they're taking risk for the council, and then ratepayers are going to carry the can for that if anything goes wrong. So it doesn't seem to be a sensible way to go forward. Now, they're my ideas, but they're also ACT policy we've campaigned on. We're now part of a coalition government, and so we have a Minister for Building and Construction. His name's Honourable Chris Pink. He's an MP who's based out in Kaipara-ki-Maharangi, which is the what we call it, the Helensville district. And I have regular chats with him about some of my ideas.
Yeah.
And I know that Chris Pink's working on making the building process much smarter. So look, information, digital information.
100%.
AI will potentially play a part in this, but just starting off by being very, very clear about who has the ability to manage risk, and what is the role of regulation. And
who is best placed to manage that risk? That is the right statement.
Yeah,
who is best placed to manage that risk?
That's the right place.
Yeah.
It's the right place to start.
Yeah.